man was walking in the woods one day when he saw a bear out of the corner of his eye. He stopped, said a silent prayer. God, I know you can do all things. Will you please make this bear a fellow Christian? The bear caught up to the man, placed his paw on the man's shoulder, and said, Brother, will you pray with me? Dear God, for this meal that I am about to receive, make me truly thankful. This is The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilsman. Welcome to episode 37 of The Christian Bear. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Hilskamp. Today I'm happy to welcome my mentor and friend, Jess Pettitt, to the podcast. Stirring up difficult conversations for over a decade, performing as a stand-up comic, and speaking on stage as a diversity specialist, Jess is a member of the National Speakers Association and is a certified speaking professional. Having lived across the country and serving overseas as a Peace Corps volunteer, Jess is also the author of Good Enough Now. She lives in Eureka, California with her partner and their pug lab mix, Leo. So Jess, thank you again for joining us today on The Christian Bear. I'm really glad to have you and have your thoughts and your wisdom on belief and how you see belief. So to get us started, and I say this with a healthy dose of sarcasm, this is the quote-unquote easy question. What do you believe?
It's a great question, certainly as a starting place. I think I fundamentally believe that even though some people may be in denial of it, there is still a belief in order to be in denial that we are set up and or wired for good. And by virtue of that being a belief, we are always trying to do better. We are always trying to do more good. And I actually believe by us trying to do more good, we are role modeling for other people to do the same and to encourage space for them to also do the same.
Thank you. So obviously I know a good amount about your background and what you do, I would say both professionally and just kind of, in who you are. But could you talk a little bit more about holding that space for goodness, for what you hope to see in the world?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of evidence that we really focus on rare outlier kind of events. People are terrified of shark attacks or plane crashes or being struck by lightning, but we drive vehicles all the time. We jaywalk all the time. We ride bicycles. Those things are far more deadly or injurious than the things that we spend a lot of time fearing. So fear is not necessarily rooted in logic, right? And I think that it's very easy to focus on instances or people or the phrase hurt people, that folks that are damaged in some way, their life has taught them in some way to not demonstrate the goodness that is in people. That gets a lot of attention. And so my deeply held belief that we are all good and that we are actually trying to do good. And more importantly, in trying to do good, we are actually trying to do better. The holding the space for that allows for some generosity and curiosity on kind of what better means for each person if the fundamental starting place is good. And the holding of the space, I think, is kind of keeping the walls open for that sense of curiosity to find out what individual definition or what motivates an individual to actually do better. That space holding can be sharing your own vulnerability or allowing someone to share theirs, living and walking in your own sense of authenticity, allowing someone else to do the same thing. But that's the kind of twofold dance of that, is really holding the space between my fundamental belief that we are all good and that what motivates that is for us to all collectively do better.
Thank you. I really resonate with the idea of starting from good and getting to the place of curiosity. I really like that. Thank you. So, next question, how have you come to hold these beliefs?
How have I come to hold them? I don't know that never I don't know that at some point in time I never held them, if that makes any sense. I mean, I think it's pretty fundamental to kind of who I am as a being. I think that truth is a heat seeking missile. And so if that's a fundamental belief I have held, then I think my family, I think through schooling, through my own inquiry or sense of curiosity, my own lived experience, I have really sought out confirmation of that belief. And by finding the confirmation over and over and over again, it just builds that belief up even further. Now I think I am almost always challenged with examples of someone who did not do a good thing or someone who doesn't strive to be better, as if that's going to dissuade me of my beliefs. And those instances may exist. And if the circumstances changed, I think that they would resort back to the idea of making something better because fundamentally it's good. Um, so I think it's a tautological circle that I think I just manifest in constantly.
Thank you. Has any experience made you question your beliefs? Did your beliefs change, and if so, how?
I think all experiences make you question, and if they don't, then it's probably not an experience. The question makes me think of some of the research that I did around Mother Teresa and her work, that she questioned what she believed in, and most people don't think of like a religious figure questioning what they believe in because it's all in a book and like that's what you believe in. But I highly recommend questioning what you believe in, because if you come back to it, if your belief system survives your own rigorous questioning process, then you're just going to believe in it that much more. But more importantly, I think you'll be able to explain to other people why you believe what you believe. There's an air of confidence, not necessarily arrogance. It's really hard to be arrogant when you're rigorously questioning your fundamental belief system. But when you come back to those fundamental beliefs, there's a confirmation there that you will then believe that thing even stronger. You'll be able to explain it to other people. You'll also be able to empathize with other people who are in the same questioning process without being challenged or defensive about it, but actually engage in an ongoing questioning process about your own belief systems, which then, again, going back to the first question, holds space for other people to challenge their own belief systems to do better with their own belief systems. And these are like some heavy answers. I feel like I'm supposed to say pudding. Pudding inspires me, which it does, but that's different.
Hey, pudding's fine. That's perfectly fine to something that inspires you. So, one thing I know about you, and some of our listeners may or may not, is that humor is something that you're known for, both as someone who has a background in stand up, but also in your speaking career. So, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what place humor has in your life. I think it's something that it has a huge part in my life, if nothing else than to make sense of all the shit that's going on in the world. Um, but I wonder if you can talk more about humor and again, what place that's had for you.
I Humor plays a huge role in my life, in my own coping mechanisms, my own processing. I think humor shows up in that questioning process I was referring to. I often refer to humor as the great equalizer. No matter how contentious adversaries or different facets of a particular conversation or argument, belief system may be, if there is a commonality in laughter or in a moment of humor. There's lots of different kinds of humor, but that those shared moments of laughter, the physical act of exhaling and using your diaphragm and generating a laugh. I am not a medical person, but I think that that split second lowers blood pressure, de-escalates a situation, and suddenly there's a shared experience between the two people who metaphorically or literally were about to go to fisticuffs. All of a sudden they're on the same side of the funny situation. A joke or sarcasm or a scenario or a turn of phrase or a callback or something triangulates that tension, even if it's just for a split second, which really generates the ability for someone to connect with someone else in a way that is rooted in acceptance and creates a moment of kind of breathing room, and then back at it. But now you can go back at it, but you can't ever unknow that you actually had a shared moment with that person, which may be utterly infuriating, but you can't ever take it away. So I think humor is critical to deepening conversations, deepening connections, and really elevating our role with one another as pudding eating humanity members.
Amen to that. If you had to boil your beliefs down into one core fundamental belief, what would it be?
Well, that's fairly easy just because it's the subtitle of my book. And that is that doing the best you can with what you've got some of the time is better than nothing never. And I always have a caveat, like I'm not referring to an orthopedic surgeon, but when challenged, when uncomfortable, when working across difference, when interfacing in a situation where your inner voice is kind of like, I don't know what to do here. Um, I believe fundamentally that we are responsible for who and how we are, and that is no one else's responsibility. And because we are 100% responsible for who and how we are, the least we can do is to do the best we can with what we've got some of the time.
Thank you. So that's the end of my questions. I always like to leave time, though, at the end for folks to say anything else that they thought we might get to, but we didn't, or to promote, platform, anything that they're working on. I leave the floor open to you.
Well, I have a question for
Please.
you about belief systems, because I fundamentally love conversations, and you and I have had a history in our across our entire relationship of great conversations. So when I wrote my book, goodenoughnow.com, go visit it. But when I wrote my book, I was raised atheist pretty much, and then have evolved into my ability to be comfortable with the unknown. I think to much more of like an agnostic landing place. My grandparents were super Baptist. My brother probably identifies more as an evangelical Christian now. And so I give that as background in that belief systems, specifically related to systems of faith, I think can kind of ebb and flow and change. And we're all, in my understanding, is that we are all looking for a home, and I have found a home in the unknown. Other people find home in very like specific rule sets. Other people find home in like zero rule sets. But what is fascinating, and I thought might be an interesting question if I can pose one to you, is that when I wrote my book, some of the first feedback or responders from readers that I got were from very devout Christians saying that the concept of good enough now or do the best you can with what you've got some of the time was a fundamental teaching of Jesus. and that there is a lot of Christianity present in my book. And that was, you know, a space of curiosity for me, because I don't feel that I know enough about Christianity to have done that. And I feel fundamentally, when we're talking about justice and fairness and kindness and goodness and giving grace and space to yourself so that you can practice and give grace and space to other people, I think that there is a lot of different faith-based organizations that are rooted in those thoughts. So I thought I would ask you, because I know you're familiar with my approach for my work. How do religious structure values show up in social justice or diversity work while also still being open to failures, mistakes, and people with other worldviews? Here's a light softball question for you.
Sure. I mean, I think first off, I think yes, I would agree with the folks you spoke to about your approach, about your book. Um, I definitely can see that in what we have of the words of Jesus in the Gospels. But I also agree that it's perhaps universal through religious faith. I think it also shows up very well among many of the teachings of the Buddha, um, about being in the present, about being in who you are at this time, not in the past, not in the future, but right here, right now. It reminds me a lot of the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, who wrote. I confess that I've not read much of Thich Nhat Hanh, but the one book I have read of his is this lovely little book called Living Buddha, Living Christ, in which he doesn't necessarily compare the teachings of Jesus Christ to those of the Buddha, but he connects the two, and also discusses his own perhaps misgivings at times with Christianity and with the life of Jesus. If for no other reason than Jesus really only taught for about 3 or 4 years of his 33-ish years on Earth, whereas the Buddha taught for 60 plus, if not more. And but in any case, it definitely reminds me of that. I think when we apply Christianity particularly to social justice, I think we get into some interesting and not altogether comforting areas. For instance, um, last Thursday I participated in a faith-based demonstration, vigil, march for with the idea of protecting democracy. We marched from a church to the Ohio Secretary of State's office, and referenced the fact that the Secretary of State has gone on record saying that there is no voter suppression in Ohio, or very little, while promoting policies that are direct voter suppression. And I bring that up because I looked around the other folks who were standing there, and most were liberal interfaith leaders like myself. But there were a few folks that I didn't know, and I was kind of wondering, okay, are these folks pro LGBTQ or not? As one of probably 2 or 3 openly LGBTQ folks that were there. Um, so I say it's uncomfortable because sometimes we look at the words of Jesus, we look at the words of the Bible, we look at the words of the Quran, the Talmud, whatever text you want to point to, and we're all on the same page for social justice. And at other times we say, well, but maybe not that group. We're all on the same page, perhaps when it comes to poverty or food insecurity, but maybe not about those black or brown people. Maybe not about those gay people. Maybe about women only so far as they don't speak in church. I mean, Christianity as a group has had a wonderful, and I say that with sarcasm, tradition of coming alongside, supporting, advocating for the freedoms or for justice of one group, and then turning around and arguing against the justice for another group. And we see this constantly throughout history. So I think, so again, I would call it an uncomfortable support of social justice. I still believe, and I realize there's a lot of people, including some friends of mine, who would vehemently disagree with me, but I still believe that religion, that faith, that spirituality can be one of the most impactful sources for good and for justice in the world. At the same time, I recognize that Christianity is currently being used as, and unfortunately probably will be again in the future, but is being weaponized to attack communities, including my own queer community at the moment. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Jess, but again, I would look at least Christianity and probably religion in general as being uncomfortably pro-justice.
Yeah, I mean it's a word cloud, right? So as soon as you create a set of rules, you have to, and I'm using this word on purpose, police those rules. And who gets to be the police? That creates a system of oppression. And who doesn't get to police? Who gets policed harder versus softer? Who suffers the consequences, and who gets to edit those rules? Those are all power dynamics. But it's interesting is listening to your kind of word cloud answer to a word cloud question. So I go back to Mother Teresa, in that her fundamental delay in doing her work was it God's will, her God's will, to have that much pain and suffering on the planet, or was it God's will for her to intervene? And if it was to have that much pain and suffering, then anytime she intervened, she'd be going against God's will. And the limitations that one person or even one organization, be it global and or well-funded, cannot intervene in every single case. So if you're not intervening in every single case, and that is actually God's will, then you're also going against God's will. And that kind of spin cycle of paralysis of what to do or what not to do, I believe fundamentally is the space where your beliefs are developed and affirmed. And it is in that space that you can develop, affirm, question, rewrite, etc., your own belief system, and hopefully grant the space for someone else to do the same thing.
Agreed. Well, thank you for a very good conversation, and for again for joining us today on the Christian Bear. I really appreciate it. Again, for our listeners, I will put links to some of Jess's content, including Jess's book, in the episode description. And I encourage you to check those out. They're excellent resources, as is Jess herself. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
This has been The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilskamp.